This podcast is brought to you by the Islamic Center and NYU. For more information, visit our website at www.icnyu.org.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وبه نستعين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب قلوبنا والشفيع نفوسنا حبيب إله العالمين ولا حبيب إلا هو وأهله الذي سمع في السماء بأحمد وفي الأرض بأبي القاسم محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين اللهم صل وسلم على محمد وآل محمد. قال الله العظيم في محكم كتابه الكريم وقوله الحق والأصدق القائلين أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم سبح اسم ربك الأعلى الذي خلق فسوى والذي قدر فهدى والذي أخرج المرعى فجعله غثاء أحوى سنقرئك فلا تنسى إلا ما شاء الله إنه يعلم الجهر وما يخفى. آمنا بالله صدق الله العلي العظيم وصلى اللهم على محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. For today's discussion, inshallah, I wanted to start a new chapter of the Holy Quran in our series of contemplating upon the ayat and the verses of the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I thought to take a look and I glanced over the next several weeks at chapter 87 of the Holy Quran, which is Sura Al-A'la, which is revealed in the holy city of Mecca, and that focuses itself on various themes, including a belief in conviction and in the guidance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The chapter in and of itself is not particularly long. It's about 19 verses, and I thought that we could take a look at it fairly quickly, but at the same time extract as many ethical benefits as we possibly can from this particular chapter of the book of Allah Azza wa Jal. But before I do that, just a question that I wanted to pose based on a frequently asked question, so to say, by people, which is, why is it that we need to even learn or discuss our religion? Why is it beneficial to sit and engage in conversations like these ones? And in order to answer that question, we go back to who we are individually as a human being. We are oftentimes bound and shackled by these existential inquiries, which are consistently in our mind, and we're seeking to find answers to them. Why was I created? What is my purpose in the world? Where did I come from? Where am I going? These sorts of questions are realities that we often pose to ourselves at numerous times and at junctures during the course of our lives. And for most people, it's very easy for us to take these questions and sweep them under a rug and virtually dismiss them or ignore them. Someone who is really dedicated toward finding these answers and engaging in these questions internally, spiritually, or even discussing them with others is probably someone who takes their life a little bit more seriously. Because it's so much easier for us to neglect or reject posing of queries like that of which question our purpose in this world. Why am I here? Where did I come from? When you pose this question to your friends, to your family members, toward even those who are closest to you, most people would be like, well, who cares, right? Like, why do you want to think about that? Only thing it's going to do is occupy your mind. You lie down on the bed, you try to sleep, and you're reflecting upon your purpose in this world, and you're unable to find answers to those questions. It's just easier to ignore it, right? And go to sleep. And I think that throughout our lives, and I don't know if there's any statistic or data to, back up what I'm saying, but I think seemingly from experiential knowledge and conversations that I've had in my work from, with so many people over the last, decade or so of my life, I believe that at different times during the course of our lives, we ask ourselves these questions. For instance, when you experience mortality in your life, you see a dead body being lowered into the ground, you experience the loss of a loved one. Immediately, someone asks, what is the purpose of this world that I'm living in? When you see the birth of a child, for instance, you ask yourself that question. What is my purpose in the world? When you see what's happening in the news, tragedy after tragedy unfolding, and so much darkness and so limited light, you ask yourself the question, what is my purpose in the world? Or some things that just pop up in your mind. Because humanity, human beings, are meant to be on this quest for seeking truth, finding answers to these, again, existential questions that we encounter, excuse me, and that we endure during the course of our lives. And it's important to not throw away that ability to engage in a meaningful manner those questions and those inquiries during the course of our existence. So reason number one, why it's important to learn about our religion or to learn religion in general is to hopefully find an answer to these questions. At the very least, I'm not saying, for instance, that you're going to open up the Quran and all of a sudden that you're going to receive revelation and all of these questions are going to be answered overnight, or that you're going to make a supplication to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and you're going to, have a dream that's going to answer these questions. No, I think life in and of itself, regardless of background, regardless of religious tradition, regardless of whatever it might be, is a quest in terms of understanding and unveiling answers to these most existential questions, number one. Number two, learning or contemplating or reflecting upon the verses of the Holy Quran, or in our quest or desire to seek knowledge, be it religious knowledge or otherwise, is naturally beneficial in anything and everything that we do. These days, you take a look at the world, and we spend so much time looking down at our phones and oftentimes very limited time looking up at the skies, looking up at the stars, looking up at the sun, looking up at the moon. And more than that, we listen and we consume so much information that we feel that we are experts in anything and in everything. When in reality, there's always more to learn. You take a look today at the world or at the situation that we're in. Someone listens to a podcast, they listen to an interview on the radio, they read a really, really small article, or even worse, they read a tweet and they feel that they are an expert in whatever that field is. People don't read anymore. They don't learn, they don't study, they don't engage. They don't have this quest or this thirst toward, seeking knowledge. And that's a door that should never close. It should be something that's, whereby we're always growing, whereby we're always understanding that there's more room for growth and that we are ignorant to a whole host of realities. And like the most intelligent and the most scholarly and the most, dedicated and sincere in their quest for knowledge would often state, is that no matter how much someone has read, no matter how much someone has spent time with scholars and with experts and with academics and whoever, they would always say that the more that I learn, the more that I realize how little I know. Because the more that you read, the more that you spend time in an academic setting, the more that you spend time, at the doorstep of a library or of a individual who represents a library, you realize that this desire or this quest for seeking knowledge, there's so many things I haven't read. There's so many things I don't know. There's so many things I don't understand, which is why when many individuals would come to even the Imams of Ahlul Bayt, peace and blessings be upon them, they would tell them that, they would ask them, are you amongst the knowledgeable people who can answer my question? To which they would respond and they would say, well, I wouldn't say that I'm knowledgeable, but what I can say is that I'm not ignorant. In other words, that I do know, and I do have some knowledge, but at the end of the day, no one who is knowledgeable is ever going to claim that they are the most knowledgeable, right? Because they have a sense of humility when it comes toward seeking and finding truth. So this is number two. And point number three that I want to reference is that when we are on this quest toward learning and toward seeking and toward finding answers to these most existential questions during the course of our lives, it affects ourselves, it affects our hearts, it affects our spiritual dimension, our souls, in very unique ways. Whereby, for instance, that our desire to seek knowledge, our desire to learn, our desire to know, our desire to understand, it has an effect on us whereby it immediately makes us humble and it makes us understand people better. Look, at the end of the day, we as a human being have to, are intrinsically, essentially connected to people around us. Whether we like it or not, we have to deal with people. We have to deal with people at work, we have to deal with people in our family, we have to deal with people in our apartment buildings. We have to interact with people on a day-to-day basis. And even in the midst of the pandemic, when we were interacting with people less, at the very least, there was at least some form or some manifestation of interaction with others. And also at the same time, we understood the value and the importance of interacting with people, something beneficial to us. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He does not want us to be a people who solely marginalize or isolate ourselves from community. Even the greatest of God's creations, our messenger Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he would spend time with others, even though, of course, his closest, companion was Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the midst of his obedience, in the midst of his worship of his creator. Still at the same time, he was the head of state, he had a family, he had a community, he had people that he taught, individuals that he spent time with, and so on and so forth. And thus we have to do the same. And when we are sincere in our desire to learn, it humbles us, and oftentimes it makes us better people as well. And there's so many evidences to suggest this, that people who read more, people who learn more, people who go to college, for instance, and have academic degrees, that their emotional intelligence is also higher, for instance, and so on and so forth. You can go ahead and take a look at that within so many texts and objects of research and whatnot. Anyhow, I say all of this as an introduction because when you want to enter into a new chapter of the Holy Quran and desire to seek knowledge from Allah Azza wa Jal, it's important for us to remind ourselves why it is that we do what we do. Meaning, why is it that we spend time in gatherings like this one? It doesn't matter the number of people. It doesn't matter what you did yesterday. The ultimate objective is that we as an individual are seeking to improve where we are today in comparison with where we were yesterday. And more than that, again, through our understanding and through our desire to seek knowledge and to learn and to know, it's meant to transform our hearts and to allow for us to be a better person tomorrow, inshallah ta'ala. So there we go. Let's take a look at these first couple of verses from Surah Al-A'la, again, which is chapter 87 of the Holy Quran, which will start today, inshallah. The next couple of weeks, we'll walk through them step by step, verse by verse. God begins, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, in the name of God, the most compassionate, the most merciful. He says in verse number 1, again, if you'd like to follow chapter 87, Sabbih ismi rabbikal a'la. Glorify or celebrate the name of your Lord, the most exalted. What does it mean when God says, Sabbih ismi rabbikal a'la? Glorify or celebrate the name of your Lord. In the Arabic language, the word sabbih is the root of the word that we often employ to perform a dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is known as at-tasbih. At-tasbih is often translated as glorifying God. Glorifying God has many different meanings when we try to explain it in the English language. But nonetheless, the word tasbih or glorification of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Arabic refers to removing all sorts of imperfection from God. In other words, what we're trying to say is that when I am uttering a testimony to the existence of God, or when I'm remembering my Creator, the Lord of the heavens and the earth, when I am performing His tasbih, in reality, what I am doing is I'm removing all forms of negativity and negative perceptions that I have of Him from my mind and from my heart. Meaning that I'm breaking all of the veils and all of those negative perceptions of the Creator in my mind, such that I'm able to reach Him the way that He ought to be reached, and I'm able to understand Him the way that He ought to be understood. The way that He ought to be understood. In other words, what am I trying to say? That oftentimes when we, in other words, what I'm trying to say is that Allah Azza wa Jal, we oftentimes have our own picture of who God is, of what God is. We create this imagery of who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is, when in reality, glory be to God, He is far greater than the picture that I posit in my mind or the description that I think that I understand of him. God says in this verse, as he says in many other ayat of the Holy Quran, سَبِّحِ اسْمَ رَبِّكَ الْأَعْلَى, that glorify the name of your Lord, meaning remove all of those negative perceptions that you have of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, firstly and foremostly. What are some of these negative perceptions that I have of God? For instance, we believe that God is very distant from us. God is close to us. We believe that God seeks vengeance upon his creation, that God is an angry God, that removing that negative perception of who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is and reminding us, reminding ourselves that he is the most merciful of those who show mercy, that he cares about us, that he wants our success. All of those are a removal of the negativities that we perceive of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then at the end of the day, there are also certain realities whereby no matter how much we strive to knowing God, no matter how much we seek toward truly perfecting our knowledge of him, to recognize that we are also deficient in that, meaning that there's still more to learn, meaning that this desire and this quest for knowledge of him, which is the foundation of our religion, awwaluddin ma'rifatullah. As Ali alayhi salatu wasalam, he says in Nahj al-Balagha, that the first step or the first stage in religion is to know God. That this knowledge of God is something that consistently increases, consistently grows. Someone says, how could it be? God created us such that we know him. But why is it that it takes a lifetime or it takes a journey for us to truly know God? Because we're a human being and we're limited in our capacity and our ability. I'll give an example in order to hopefully bring this idea home. I was in a conversation with my wife the other day, and she was telling me a story about something that happened in her childhood. I've been married to my wife for 11 years. Anniversary was last weekend. And so as she's telling me the story, I told her, like, how come you never told me that before? It's like seemingly this really important moment in your life, in your childhood, whatever. She said, I don't know, whatever, never came up. After 11 years, spending so much time with her, day after day, night after night, for 11 years, she never told me this anecdote. Nothing bothered me, but what I realized at that moment, or what I realized now upon reflecting upon it, is that there's always still more to learn, even about someone who is the individual who is the closest to you in your life. You can live with someone for a decade and still understand that there are limitations for my ability to understand this person. People, married couples, for instance, they get into arguments even after 30 or 40 years after marriage. Why? If they were perfectly compatible with one another and they understood every detail and every aspect about the other individual, they'll probably never get into argument with them. You ever get into argument with yourself? No, you always try to defend yourself when you do something wrong, right? Over here, what we see is that because we are different people in this temporal and corporeal world, we can fail to understand someone else because of different factors, because of baggage, because of experiences, because of upbringing, and so on and so forth. Even though, again, you might be so close to that individual. At the same time, it takes years, it takes time to build that relationship such that you truly understand that individual that you spend so much time with. When it comes to our relationship and our journey with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it is very, very unique in that through the years and through the days and through the moments and through those intimate times that I spend with God in the month of Ramadan or when I perform pilgrimage or in the darkness of the night, I also age. I also go through experiences. I also go through ups and downs of life. I go through good times and bad times, and I experience a whole host of unique challenges and obstacles and turmoil and whatever. And thus my perceptions of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also change. Similarly, I depart from this world and I enter into a grave, and I enter into the barzakh, and then I'm raised on the day of judgment. And on the day of judgment, I'm raised. And once again, I'm held to account. And then hopefully I get to paradise in the company of the Prophet and his family, alayhim salam. And I'm slowly elevating my station and reaching the ultimate height of my existence, which is human perfection. And all of that continuously allows for the sense of unveiling of who my Creator is. And tasbih of God is to submit to the fact that my knowledge or my understanding of who my Creator is has a limited manifestation to it. And to say, oh God, I don't know you the way that you ought to be known, but I'm trying and I'm striving. And I remove all of these negative perceptions that I have of you and allow for your light to be exposed in my heart. That's the highest level of knowledge. That's the highest level of Tawheed. That's the highest level of what it means to be in a state of the glorification of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Sabbih isma rabbika al-A'la. But God doesn't say in this verse, glorify God, but rather he says, glorify the name of your Lord. Glorify the name of your Lord. What's God's name? Al-A'la, the most high or the most exalted. What does it mean to glorify God's name? Why doesn't God just say, glorify God? Why does he say glorify his name? Over here, what we learn is that the way that we understand and the way that we perceive Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is via his names and his attributes. وَلِلَّهِ الْأَسْمَاءُ الْحُسْنَى فَادْعُوهُ بِهَا. God has the most beautiful name, so call upon him by those names. He is al-A'la, the most high. He is ar-Rahman, the most compassionate. He is al-Alim, the great. He is as-Sami, the all-hearing. He is al-Basir, the all-seeing. He has these names and he has these attributes to him, Azza wa Jal. And our understanding of drawing closer to him is via these names and via these attributes, such that, again, we're able to unveil him a little bit to us. I'll give you an example. If we want to identify somebody in this room or somebody external to this room, since we're all in this room at this very moment, someone could say, has anyone seen that guy or that girl outside? Like, we're all in this room. How could anyone see who the guy or the girl outside of this room is? Or, for instance, if we want to identify an individual who is external to this room at this very moment, what we would say is, has anyone seen that individual who is wearing glasses, who has a beard, who is wearing a hijab, who has this color hair, who is holding this backpack? In order that you're attributing certain realities that are physical to the sight, that are present to the sight, in order to understand and explain who that individual is, such that we know who the person is that we're talking about. Or the easiest way is, for instance, if someone says, have you seen Muhammad, who's standing outside the prayer room? Have you seen Ali, who's standing outside the prayer room? Have you seen Fatima? Have you seen Zahra, who is standing outside of the prayer room? We attribute a name to an individual, and we call upon people by names as a means toward identifying who they are, right? That's why we have a name. And a name is not who we are. I am not Faiyaz Jafar. I am, that's my name. That's not who I am. I'm a lot more than just my name. You follow what I'm saying? A name is empty of meaning unless we understand it and attach it to who we are essentially. I'm Faiyaz Jafar. I work at the Islamic Center at New York University. I'm a husband to my wife. I'm a father to my children. I'm a son to my parents. I'm a teacher. I'm a chaplain. I'm a student. I coffee. Whatever, right? We identify ourselves essentially with who we are, but the name in and of itself is empty. You follow what I'm saying? Everyone follow what I'm saying? So over here, when God says, Sabbih isma rabbika al-A'la, we understand God via these names, via these attributes, but we don't worship the name, do we? Because then we're just worshiping a word. We have to know who it is that we're speaking about. We understand Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala via these names and via these attributes, but the idea is to plunge into the depth because it allows for us to know who it is that we're seeking, who it is that we're drawing closer to, who it is that we are worshiping. Sabbih isma rabbika al-A'la. So glorify or celebrate the name of your Lord, the most exalted, the name that's given at this moment and other times in other verses of the Quran. God speaks of other names of his numerous times, as we'll go through and we'll reference in this chapter as well. Al-A'la. Why does God, or what does it mean when God says that he is al-A'la, which is also again the name of this chapter, Surah Al-A'la, or the most exalted or the all high. What is God trying to do and trying to demonstrate when he says to us or introduces himself to us as the all exalted? Amongst the things that God seeks to do is to demonstrate his distance or his authority or his magnanimity over the creation. Other times, God calls upon himself via names of closeness. For instance, names of gentleness. God is the all-merciful. God is the all-generous. God is al-Wadud. God is the all-loving, so on and so forth, in order to demonstrate and to remind us that he is close to you. And other times, God, he speaks to us and he reminds us that he's very distant from us. Al-A'la. In order at the same time to demonstrate his authority. Because if we only see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala via those names of closeness and of proximity and of mercy and of love and of compassion, oftentimes we close the door of being an obedient servant, an obedient slave of the Creator, who is also the most authoritative and who is the all high and is the all great. In other words, for us in practice, we are seeking to find this balance consistently with regards to our worship, with regards to our understanding of who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is. As the hadith of the Messenger sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam states, he says, لا يكون مؤمن مؤمنا حتى يكون خائفا رجاء. That a believer is not a believer until she or he is fearful and hopeful. Fearful in God's greatness, in God's magnanimity, in God's highness, in God's holiness. Fear of our own sin, fear of our own transgression, fear of our own lapses, fear of our own errors, fear of our own souls deceiving ourselves. And on the flip side, the hadith says, لا يكون مؤمن مؤمنا حتى يكون خائفا رجاء. A believer is not a believer until she or he is fearful, but also hopeful. Hopeful in what? Hopeful in God's mercy, hopeful in God's generosity, hopeful in God's compassion. In the dua from Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam, he says, Ilahi, amilna bifadlik wa la tu'amilna bi'adlik. That, oh Allah, deal with me with your grace. Judge me. Hold me to account via your grace, via your compassion, via your love for me, not via your justice. Justice is what we're afraid of because we have wronged ourselves. We've committed so many sins, acts of transgression, so on. But rather deal with me with your gentleness. Once in a while, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so that we are consistent in finding that balance between hope and in fear, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he reminds us of his authority and of his might. And in this verse, he does this for that. He says, Sabbih isma rabbika al-A'la. So glorify the name of your Lord, who is the All-High. In verse number 2, he continues. And he states, الَّذِي خَلَقَ فَسَوَّى. And he is the one, who is the one God. He is the one who has created and proportioned. He is the one who created and decreed everything of proportion in this kingdom of his. What does it mean when we state that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who has created? What did he create? What did God create? God created everything. الَّذِي خَلَقَ فَسَوَّى. And once he created everything, he also appointed it with a certain appointment. He also attached to it a certain decree. And in the words of Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam in Nahj al-Balagha, he references this in a really beautiful way. And I'll read what the Imam alayhi salam says. He says, أَهَالَ الْأَشْيَاء لِأَوْقَاتِهَا وَلَامَ بَيْنَ مُخْتَلِفَاتِهَا وغرز غرائزها وألزمها أشباهها عالما بها قبل ابتدائها محيطا بحدودها وانتهائها عارفا بقرائنها وأحنائها. He says that after Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created the world and created everything within this world, he assigned a life, he assigned a portion of time, and he connected it with everything. The sun has this many years to live. This person has this many years to live. This person has this many years to live. This bird is going to live for this amount of time, so on and so forth. and he gathered together its particles, and he gave it in its property, and he attributed to it its properties and its form, meaning he perfected it in the way that only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala could. And then over here he says, عارفاً بقرائنها وأحنائها, that he knew each and every single one of these creations. محيطاً بحدودها وانتهائها, he had an awareness, and his knowledge is comprehensive of each and every one of his creations before its very existence. Meaning God, of course, knew of our eventual creation before we were created. And he knew its limitations, and he knew its end, meaning that decree. He knew its shape, and he knew its form. Meaning, in other words, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't just create with a lack of awareness and an understanding of what it might be, but he has an understanding completely and holistically of what it will be. الذي خلق فسوى. That's exactly what Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib references within this hadith in Nahj al-Balagha. In the ayah of the Holy Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, he is the one who created and appointed it a certain decree. وَالَّذِي قَدَّرَ فَهَدَى. And he is the one who determined, meaning he, again, attached that decree to it. فَهَدَى. And he guided all things. He guided all things, all living things, with the ability to know, and even all seemingly non-living things, with the ability to know and with the ability to perceive Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Meaning that God gave every single one of us, and he gave the birds that fly in the sky, and he gave the plants that stem out of the earth, and he gave even those inanimate objects like the rock and like the stone and like the tree and whatever it might be, the ability to know and to understand and to perceive Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We might not perceive, and God mentions this within the Holy Quran numerous times, how the birds worship God, or how the plant worships God, or how even the stone worships Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But they worship. يُسَبِّحُ لِلَّهِ مَا فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَمَا فِي الْأَرْضِ. In another verse within the Holy Quran that God repeats several times, that everything within the heavens and everything within the earth are in a state of this glorification of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we, لا يفقهون, we don't understand. We can't perceive. But what we can understand and what we can perceive is our responsibility. Our responsibility to understanding our potential, to answering and understanding those existential questions. Where did we come from? What is my purpose? Why am I here? Why today? Why not yesterday? All of those questions that pop up into our mind, that we seek toward identifying, that we seek toward answering, are steps that we have the ability to find answers to, and that we've been guided to the potential within this world toward finding answers to those questions. But it's up to us to take those next steps during the course of our journey to Allah Azza wa Jal. Inshallah, we will stop over here, verse number 3. And next week, inshallah, we'll take a look at verses 4 through 7 or 8, inshallah ta'ala. Walhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina wa Nabiyyina Muhammad wa alihi at-tayyibin at-tahirin. Allahumma salli ala.
If you would like to listen to more, please donate to www.icnyu.org/donate. For more of our virtual programs, go to www.icnyu.org/classes. If you have any questions, email us at info@icnyu.org.